Hello, everyone, and welcome to the future of space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Michelle Hanlon. Michelle is the co-founder and president for All Moonkind. She's also a space lawyer and co-director of Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi School of Law. Michelle, welcome to the future space.
Daniel, hi. Thanks for having me.
Good. I've been wanting to have you in the future space for quite some time. You and I, we've been kind of crossing paths on several events. You're all over space law that's happening right now. So thank you for taking the time.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I've been wanting to be asked these questions. So finally.
All right. Before we get into space law and everything that's happening right now, could you share with us your 3 words that for you capture the essence of space?
So I want to just preface this. I'm a lawyer, right, by saying I thought a lot about this question because you gave it to me well in advance. And I had a lot of very inspirational, but I thought it would be much more poignant and realistic if I just tell you what came into my head the very first time you asked me. And it was cold, dark, and home. So that is, to me, that is what space is.
So cold, dark, and home. So you see space as a home for the planet or home for the humans. I mean, the like in the bigger sense, the smaller sense. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more?
So I think that we always forget that we are in space. And, I almost want to sort of change all of our nomenclature. The way we don't talk about colonizing space anymore. Why do we keep calling it outer space? Because it's not like it's out there and we're in here. We're part of space. Space is our home. It always has been. And so to me, when I think about it coming up as home, I mean that it's like our backyard. We belong in space. We have been sitting in our house here very timidly for way too long. We finally are getting that technology. We've been dreaming about going into our backyard forever and ever. And now we can finally do it. And so it's cold and it's dark and it's scary, but that's the challenge. And that's also, there are a lot of cold, dark places on Earth that humans have gone to and made them into homes. We adapt really well. And so I want to start thinking of space. I want the world and humanity to start thinking about space as where we are and where we belong and where we need to explore.
Yeah, I often say to people, space is not a destination. It's rather just the future of our species in the same way that beyond the ocean was the the expanding of our experience into the human awareness. We're like, going to space is nothing different than what we've been doing ever since we started to produce technology. Every time that we have the capacity and the tools to go beyond, to go above the mountain, to go beyond the ocean, beyond the river, across a continent on wheels, we go and explore. In space, the only reason why we never expand into space was just a question of technology. And now that we have the technology and we're able to explore and test in these remote places, it's just a question of time before we continue doing what we've been doing on the planet for thousands of years, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I love thinking about, the very first balloon ride, which was in France, right? Hot air balloon. And we didn't believe we could breathe up above a certain level in our own, sort of atmosphere. When we thought maybe the air got too thin at, 30 feet. And so we put a bunch of animals in that basket and sent them up. And they survived. I think the chicken got a broken leg, but otherwise, this is exactly it. And the time we have never been timid. You're right. We have totally been blocked by technology and our ability to keep sending things up. Yeah, it's a little bit harder to send a human to space than it is to send them into the air. But back in the 1700s, it was pretty daunting to even get like a hot air balloon up and a chicken and a lamb up, So I hate to say destiny because that has so much baggage with it, right? Um, it's not destiny. It's just inevitable. It's an inevitability that we will move on beyond space and hopefully meet other life forms out there.
I had this argument, when we talk about the meaning of words and how words can be taken literally and or metaphorically. I had this almost argument when I was at in Santa Cruz during a conference, and I was stating that from the perspective of life, not that I want to personalize life, but if we consider that life has a force, driving force of expansion, it's been growing in complexity on Earth, so that ultimately it could leave Earth. So they could, if you think of Earth that has its knowledge and also an arc of life existence, it's about like in parenthood where it's ready to let the kids go and establish themselves somewhere else and take the wealth and the education that they've had, and because otherwise it would be a huge waste of investment if there's all this universe out there, where the planet's just like a cell in this entire ecosystem of this body, this universe. And it would be such a waste to be limited to this tiny place, in the same way that like life would have been kind of wasted had it stayed for a single cell, but then it became multi-cell and then led to the Cambrian evolution. And now we're about to go from single planet to multi-planet. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. I think, sorry, my phone is ringing. I can ignore it. It'll stop. Um, yes. And I think, think about the cradle of civilization in Africa and how we all moved from there. I mean, the Polynesians, I think, are the best example to draw from, because they were on islands in the Pacific and they couldn't see anything. At least, in Africa, you're just trudging along and moving beyond what's getting cold, so forth. But the Polynesians looked out and saw exactly what we see when we look at. They didn't actually. It would be like us looking up and just seeing black, right? Because they didn't see anything beyond the horizon. There was no other land, and yet they decided to just build a boat and go. I mean, we're looking at the moon, we're looking at Mars, we're looking at asteroids. They literally just saw the edge of the world and thought, okay, let's see what's out there. And so to me, that is the embodiment of the human spirit. And also I love your imagery of children, and they grow up and then they go and they make their own homes, right? And in some cultures they continue to build the home that they were born in. And that's exactly what we're looking at too, because not everybody wants to leave Earth, right? And certainly the people who want to leave Earth aren't leaving because they don't like Earth. It's just time. They're off to start their own home, wherever that may be in the universe.
And when the children leave the family, it's never at the expense of the family. If you have some children, some will stay closer, some others will go, in a different country. But all this is creating a family wealth. When we talk often about these differences of opportunities in minorities, we often talk about how growing up the family wealth is so important. And so as we go to space, we're going somewhere else, getting knowledge and expanding the human experience. But ultimately, it's for the benefit of Earth. Earth is going to be so advantaged for so many reasons. But just before we get into the what you're working on, law, because I think it's fascinating, the amount of awareness that we have in moving forward with the desire to do good. We're not moving forward just like a cowboys, and we just came out of a conference, Beyond Earth Institute, and there were so many people who in that room are spending so much effort trying to make sure that the steps that we make, that we take forward are sounded and correct. I mean, even though we're going to be making mistakes, there's no way around it, but the desire to do the right thing is there. So before we get there, I just want to, when I flew back and I was on the plane. I was watching First Man, the Neil Armstrong movie with um, the Canadian actor Reynolds. But I was, yeah, Ryan. But I was so we forget about how the cost, what used to be the cost of human exploration, which we don't necessarily have today. Like we have robots on Mars that are gathering knowledge, but at the beginning of the space era, all that was done by humans at their own cost. There was a lot of people that died in the process, and you can just see, the dedication from, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, but like how it was just a toll on human lives. And now we're entering this era where that cost of human exploration is almost nil because we can use robots. Um, is that something like I guess the tie-in is when we get into law, there's going to be an interesting field of that exploration, right?
Absolutely. When we think about law and humans and law and robots and so many frightening, so many opportunities with respect to artificial intelligence and how we move that. And a lot of the times, I like to ask panels that I moderate, why send humans at all? The cost can be very dear, right? And the answer is because everything that we have AI do is to mimic humans and mimic the human response and hopefully mimic a perfect human's response. But there are lots of decisions that can't be made perfectly. And so what is the AI going to do then? And also there's just no way to replicate the human learning process. There's no way that we can have AI look back at Earth and say, oh, look at that beautiful blue marble. That's just that sort of realization is not going to happen. And I will be very honest, Daniel, I've never been a spiritual person. I was a corporate M&A attorney, all of this foo-foo, ha-ha, whatever, spirit, yeah, whatever. I've got to go get my coffee because I've got to do another 20-hour day. But thinking about space has really made me think a lot more internally about what it actually means. And it's such a gift to be able to think that way. I was at the tail end of the International Astronautical Congress in Paris in September. I was invited to attend a conference and contribute to a conference called the Global Periphery. And again, I was the only lawyer there. Everyone else was an artist. And I really enjoyed every moment of it until the very last piece, which was performance art, which I just don't get. I just don't get it. I'm sorry. I'm not creative enough. But it really worked because it made me feel really, really sad. And then at the very end of it, the title card showed up and it was called, Is It a Luxury to Dream of Space? Wow. And so from that moment on, I was like, my goal in life is to make sure it's not a luxury for anybody to dream about space. And when I think about that and finding this, I didn't find a purpose, it's just sort of, it's really, the focus of what I want to do with the rest of my life is really sharpening. And it has a lot to do with my relationship with space.
Did you grow up with the interest of space and law was kind of a tool to get back to what you wanted, or actually space came after? First you went into law and then you saw the writing on the walls for the future and you thought that there would be an opportunity there?
So I'm a classic want to be an astronaut. Or didn't everybody want to be an astronaut, right? And then I, got into geometry. I was all right, trigonometry, okay, pre-calculus. I was done. I was out. And so I put those dreams to bed. Didn't think about being able to access space through any other means. And so political science major, law school, just sort of, I'd be very clear. I loved learning the law. I loved having that discipline. I really loved doing what I did, even though I was sort of a corporate pig and just, throwing money around at different clients and so forth. protecting money for different clients. But I always had Star Trek. You know, my boys were raised with space and all sci-fi and Ender's Game and The Expanse, all of those amazing books. Douglas Adams. And when I empty nested, I sort of just sat back and decided, okay, I'm thrilled with my family. I'm really happy and settled with that. Now is the time that I can actually maybe think about giving back to community. And for me, community means humanity. And so I went back to law school and got my advanced degree in air and space law, and then ended up here at the University of Mississippi.
And so, for All Moonkind is the outcome of your background in law and where you want to go from there?
Absolutely. So it's actually also a little bit of patriotism thrown in. I was studying at McGill, and Jan Werner, who was then head of the European Space Agency, was in China, and he was promoting his excellent concept of that moon village, right? And he was at a press conference in China that I was watching as I was studying, and he said, "China, you must return to the moon with us, if only to take down those American flags." So of course he was joking, great soundbite, but that really got me thinking, wait, come on, can he do that? Why would somebody do that? And that's when I realized there's this huge gap in international law. That there are all sorts of rules about if you send an object there, it's yours to keep, but there's nothing protecting. And it's not just Apollo, like Luna 2, the first human-made object to impact another celestial body. Lunar 9, the first human-made object to impact softly on another celestial body. Chang'e 4, making it to the far side of the moon for the first time. All of these things are unprotected. These are human milestones. These are things that I want my children and grandchildren to be able to go to the moon and see the way I want to go see, I wanted to go see the pyramids or Stonehenge. It's a travesty. And so it is, yes, it was that studying the law and realizing the gaps. Of course, there's a lot of gaps in space law. And I think we can fill them all if we start with this baseline of universality, of accepting that what's up there on the moon, that blueprint represents all of us, not just Americans.
I sometimes feel that there's a certain naivete in the space community about how, because I think that a lot of people grew up with Star Trek and this vision of, everybody's going to sing Kumbaya and be on a nice ship. But the reality of evolution is a little bit more complicated than that. And already, I think going to space, yes, is that new opportunity of evolving, taking our society to, the new place in the same way that North America represented that ideal after Europe. But do you think that I feel that there's a certain naivete on how that development is going to happen. I mean, already China makes it clear that it has its own agenda. Like we have to understand that it's going to be complicated. Do you agree with how complicated it's going to be, and maybe there's a little bit too much of naive belief within the space community?
Yes, absolutely, and I mean it from people who think, oh, once we're up there, we'll all get together and we'll be friends up there, or we should reach out an olive branch to the Chinese because we're stunting human growth by not doing that. Fundamentally on Earth we have two very opposing regimes, right? I'm not going to characterize them. People know what they are, and because that would obviously prove my own bias, and that's not going to go away. And there are people, who don't believe the same things I do and are happy in a way that I would never be happy. And so we have to recognize that everybody should have this choice to live how they wish to live. And so when we lawyers get together and talk about lunar governance, and what we're really talking about, or what I'm really talking about, is preventing conflict. It's not kumbaya, hey, we are humanity. It's let's prevent conflict, and then and then it's up to the next generation to get us to the Star Trek model. But we're so far from that right now. I do believe, Daniel, I'm not wearing my rose-colored glasses, but I do have rose-colored glasses. I would like to see 2 different moon bases on the moon. I'd like to see an Artemis moon base and then China, Russia, and their friends and allies moon base, because I really think that those moon bases are going to need each other. If only because, if there's 6 people on each one, after a little while, you're going to have a cocktail party because you're going to be bored out of your mind with the 5 people you're stuck with. Or they're going to need something from each other. And then, the government down here is going to say, no, don't do that. That you'll compromise our national security, or, we don't have enough money to cover that, or whatever it will be. And those people on the moon looking down on our beautiful blue marble are going to say, forget that. We're going to go and we're going to be friends and we're going to figure this out. And the whole invasion of the Ukraine, I have not spoken to any of the astronauts who were in ISS during this process. Of course, the media reports that everything on station was fine, and who knows. But I have heard that even though there's rules that say, the Americans aren't supposed to go into the Russians, that they do anyway. And so whatever we will find out 50 years from now about what happened, I'd like to believe that that's just, 5 people living in space together are looking down on Earth and thinking, wow, those people are really stupid.
Now, I want to pick your brain a little bit, because you said that part of your mission is trying to prevent conflict as we go to space. From someone who's been doing solo wilderness expeditions and loves studying the human psychology and the human story, unfortunately, conflict is part of evolution. In families, you all come. You're born in the same family. There's conflict, within the family. The people that are married understand that there will be conflict, and from my perspective, often it's more about how can we manage positively conflict, so that, and I think that's the secret between couples and in the family, or within societies, whether it's the United Nations and where we are today, is that we've managed conflict, the differences of cultures and realities, so that it becomes a win-win situation for people, as opposed to deny the reality and the reason for conflicts. Because one of the common things that we hear from when we go to space, we look back and we say, oh, we all come from the same planet, therefore we should all be hugging each other. I think that I can make the same judgment when I step out of my house and I look back and I say, we all look from the outside, it looks just one building, but within that building you have different rooms. They all have their purposes, and no one wants to start living in a giant, open space. And I think it's important as a society to recognize those differences. We don't have the same background. We don't have that same life experience. Yes, there might not be borders from space, but there's geographical borders, there are cultural borders. And I think that we need to acknowledge them so that we can rise above them, and not thinking that just because we're from the same place, everybody agree and there won't be conflict. I mean, is that something that resonates with you?
Yes. So first of all, I don't know what you're talking about with respect to marriage, because my husband and I never fight. Can't even say it with a straight face. Yes, and I thank you for calling me out on that. I think what we want to do is prevent the silly conflict, I guess, or the obvious prevent the obvious conflict. If right now we have China and the United States both looking at the South Pole, it would be nice if they are able to land far enough apart from each other where they're not impeding each other. It would be nice if neither of them actually claim anything, or any of the, and that's how are we going to figure that out? You're not allowed to claim property on the moon. A state is not allowed to claim property or claim territory by any means whatsoever in space. So what does that mean, and how are we going to allow different states to utilize resources? But you're right, we're not going to be able to and conflict. And you're also incredibly right in saying conflict is how we grow. And so we need to manage the conflict. I mean, I'm just mimicking you now, Daniel. We need to manage that conflict for positive results. And that is in essence what the law is about. It's, we put up the Treaty of Westphalia, we put up these guardrails because it was easier for humans to deal with each other if we had sort of boundaries to think about, and that helped us manage. It didn't end war, but it helped a little bit. And maybe one day we actually will have the war to end all wars, but I doubt it. Human nature is human nature, and even the best of us get jealous and envious and selfish, and that's just going to happen. And our goal as space lawyers is to, my goal as a space lawyer, I should say, is to sort of let out that tether and give the humans in space the opportunity to figure out their own relationships with some. This was actually, again, at the Beyond Earth Institute, the concept of guardrails that Hank Rogers absolutely just, guardrails is a terrible term. So now I'm trying to think of something else, but guidance. I cannot go and say, okay, this is the rule that should be in space. But let's go back to the children analogy. Humans in space, we're going to give them everything we can to succeed, and that includes legal frameworks. But at some point, we have to push them over that threshold and stand back. And that's what we need to do, and we need to scramble to make sure we really are giving them all the tools they need to survive.
There are 2 points that I want to talk to you about. So, for me, there's this idea that human nature is worse than the nature itself, and for me, I actually flip it. I see the human nature as better than nature, because in nature there's a rawness, and then there's a chaos that is absolutely that doesn't care about the consequences. There's if a volcano erupts, it blankets everything. There's nature works on the scale and trials and errors that is beyond, it's over millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years. We'll see if it works. If something dies, it is what it is. But we're the one trying to take that chaos and give it a certain moral judgment to it. So for me, the human nature is that it is actually trying to do better than the nature is doing that's its pure form. And policies and moral, or in the laws, is that framework that we create so that it gives a certain, like, it improves itself as we move forward. Otherwise, it would be just a law of jungle where, like, it's all over the place. So when I was sitting at Beyond Earth Institute and really realizing that the policies is a piece of technology that we've created so that we can move forward in a more productive manner, as opposed to just being this free for all. It's all over the place, and it's again, it's a law of the jungle. So what would be your thoughts on that?
So I feel like you've just put on rose-colored glasses. I agree with you. I think for the most part, human nature does think twice, for example, about eating another human, and we think twice about doing things that will destroy our neighbors, whereas sort of that Darwin and survival of the fittest, you don't think about that. But there are a lot of humans who think very Darwin-like, right? Who will do things for purely selfish reasons without care of the consequences. And I don't think we can weed those humans out from the ones we send into space. I don't know, that you could do any number of psychological tests. I mean, right now, we're going to send humans to space just because they're really rich. So how are we going to make different decisions about who goes and who lives there, who starts that community? So that is one thing. We need rules because we do need to say sort of 10 commandment like things. Don't murder when you're up there. Make sure everyone gets oxygen. Let everyone have access to water. Let everyone call home. These are some very basic rights, and that's what I would like to see. And when we talk about For All Moonkind, when we talk about, I've done a lot of research into commercial space stations and looking at the humans that are going to live on those stations and visit those stations, and how easy it would be to recognize on paper as part of that contract that human rights apply in space, and that those human rights will include very basic things like a right to oxygen. I think we have come a long way as a human society. We're not by any means perfect. We're not by any means where we want to be. But we generally tend to, or the majority of us tend to abhor when a woman is killed because she doesn't want to marry somebody, or when a government annihilates an entire village, and so that's a lot of progress compared to a couple centuries ago, where that was just all humans were fungible except the one who was on top, right? So we have a lot of growing to do, and now it's going to be really interesting to see if this ability to grow out into the reaches of our home will help us change our nature, or help us continue that evolution of our nature, so it is generally much more benevolent than before.
Because often people forget the reality that we're about to be 8 billion on the planet, and while population has kind of exploded, conflicts have not exploded on the Earth. In fact, there's a lot more people managing and preventing conflicts and making sure that we move forward constructively, as opposed to, we have this conception that the world is doom and gloom right now. But I think this is more of a problem with media and perspective, and the fact that we have trouble managing that much information. My empathy as an individual has evolved so that it's applicable to my immediate surrounding. If I care to the people around me, then I increases my chance of survival. But having this sense of awareness of all the bad that happens around the world, I don't think that mentally we're good at managing the negative news around the world. So I want people to remember that there's a lot more good being done than a lot more bad, and the fact that we're so many people and we're managing that is because we're not a bad species. And the Beyond Earth at the beginning, the keynote, the producer of The Expanse, was explaining how we must anticipate how once we move into space, there's going to be new groups of people that want to represent themselves because they have a different reality. The moon people will want at some point to just say, we have a different reality. We have our own interests that we have to protect. The people who are going to be on the Mars is going to be the same thing. The people who are going to be, in the belts or in the asteroids, their different reality also implies that they want to protect themselves. So, and Earth is going to, has to understand and prepare those divisions of cultures and realities, right?
So, and it goes all the way back to, if you think about the formation of societies, it starts with the family. And the families live close to each other, and then they build little communities that were extended families, and then they had fights with the families next to them, and then they reached a truce, and they became a bigger community. That's exactly it, and that's what we have to allow to happen in space. What we need to do is not just recognize our differences and diversities, but celebrate them. And we are not doing a good job of that right now. But that is hopefully something that we can. And we're not going to. When you look back at the Apollo program and how the Americans beat the Russians to the moon, or the Soviets, what do we look at that society? So, sure, most of the engineers in Apollo were white men, white Western men, Western European men, but they were from different cultures themselves originally, Irish, German, and so forth. And it was that diversity that allowed us to advance. And so that's the kind of difference. I mean, we need the diversity of the entire Earth in order to survive in space. I mean, if you look at our species from an evolutionary standpoint, we got here because all of our ancestors, right? There's not any one ancestor who's better or worse than another. There's no community or culture that's better or worse than another. And that's what we need to harness to be able to survive in our wider home.
So you're talking about engineering, and I think that part of the reasons why we struggle currently is because the language that we use, or the story that we've created about the human species, has no room for the complexity of life, of what it is to be human. We think of humans in just this kind of really rational, and the way that life should happen is just this clean, progression, when in reality, the human species is not a bad species. Is that life is messy by design. It's evolving, growing, learning is by definition messy, because you constantly have to push the boundaries and you have to make mistakes. And, we understand what the concept of mistake is for an individual, or for technology, or for an entrepreneur. But the reality is also cultures make mistakes, societies make mistakes. And that is, it's also a messy process. Do you think that we need to reshape our story, so that we can empower ourselves moving forward?
I think at the height of, in the U.S., we're still very divided, but at the height of the BLM and COVID protests, and the Americans showed a very ugly side of themselves to the world. And a lot of my non-American friends sort of, oh my goodness, it must be so hard, that's so bad, wow, this is the decline of democracy. And I said, no, this is the apex of democracy, or hopefully not the apex, hopefully it's just another notch as we continue. Because how powerful is our society that we can air all of our dirty laundry to the entire world? That this is it. It's ugly. We can be very ugly and awful to each other, and that's not going to stop. So yeah, we need to accept history, not erase it. We need to recognize history. I saw there was a teacher who had put on a poster that Hitler was a very convincing and charismatic leader, and I think he got fired. But that's the truth. He was a convincing and charismatic leader. And we need to teach our children about Hitler, so that we don't have another one come up. If you don't know how he did it, when he did it, it's so important to understand his psyche, and understand how not to get caught up in something like that. And so the For All Moonkind is about protecting history. And so I understand the hurt that our history has, but I'm not going to say especially in the United States, every culture has horrible things in its past. And I understand the fervor to, not celebrate, take down those statues. But we have to recognize also that, for all the bads in Thomas Jefferson, there were a lot of goods. And I'm reading a book by the philosopher Thomas Kuhn, I think it's pronounced Kuhn. He's the person who coined the term paradigm shift. And he said, humans really just, they look for problems they can solve. They don't look for problems they can't solve. And he coined the term paradigm shift because you have to find the anomaly, and then you have to be confident enough in yourself to tackle that anomaly, even though it goes against everything you have been taught, everything, so forth. So I've been really captivated by this book, but what really makes me sad is that he talks about science throughout history, and it's all men. It's all men, he, him. How sad is it that we have lost centuries of contributions by women because we didn't believe that they should go to school past 7th grade or past 3rd grade or whatever. And so that is what, I think what we need to really focus on isn't so much good, bad. I mean, that changes right? Every day, every year, something else is bad. But recognize, when we think about um, woke culture, and people saying, well, back in the 60s, it was okay to say that. No, it was never okay to say it. It was just accepted because nobody challenged it. And that's what we need to do. I'm not saying, that we need to, I'm sorry I brought up the term woke because I don't like it, but fundamentally, we have to accept our evolution, and that means seeing the bad and encouraging us to do the good, and making sure that we don't silence any voices anymore.
Because I always say that it's we have to move forward with acquired wisdom rather than looking backward and trying to find someone to blame. Because it's always easy to look back in hindsight and apply your value judgment. But the reality is that everything is a product of its time, and what changes and evolves are values. And I don't want to really look at the past and divide it and segment it, but it's just that our values change and they can be addressed, all across the border. We're giving a better awareness and a better understanding to the complexity of who we are. The the sadness that I have right now is that as the world is becoming more complex, we're not spending enough time and energy giving the tools to people to negotiate that complexity. And I think that's one of the negative effect of people separating themselves and siloed, and they're siloed is because they don't know how to process that. It threatens their own world, and instead of like embracing the the complexity, they kind of retreat themselves into these worlds that are super simple. And I think that's we can go into religion, but that's one of the attractions where they gave themselves a framework that don't question it. And if I had to build a curriculum in school, for me, I would put as much effort in teaching civic ethics and communication tools so that people have what is needed to deal and to deal with the complexity. And as we go to space, there's going to be even more complexity. So that for me, it's definitely where I think there should be like effort put into that. I mean, being in policy, I guess you're fully aware of that reality, right?
So I think one thing that is very, very hopeful about space is, in the United States anyway, it's one area where the Biden administration didn't change anything that the Trump administration did. And so that shows me, okay, we finally matured to the point where not every president has to come in and put his own imprimatur on the program. But it just this acknowledgement that this is something that we need to work for, and it goes all the way back, to Eisenhower. President Eisenhower was the first person to say, no, let's not protest when Sputnik flies over, because we want space to be for everybody. Enough with these sovereign boundaries. Let's just say, fine, let it fly over. And we have that instant customary international law that space is for everyone. And yes, it is really hard to figure out all of the complexities of this concept that space is for everyone. Because what does that even mean? Everyone, you can't own anything in space, but aren't you owning an orbit when you put a satellite there? And what does it mean if another country can't put their satellite there? It's starting to get really crowded. We have to start thinking about these things. And we have to bring in, you're right, we have to bring in with it all these complexities. And we worry, and a lot of people, the argument has been that the billionaires want to get into space before we have rules, right? Because it's the Wild West and they can make their own rules. And sure, they can. If Elon Musk gets to Mars next year, who's going to stop him from claiming it, right? But he's going to be tethered to Earth. He's not going to be able to have a community out there that survives without Earth. So we have all these human connections that won't just disappear. But you're right. We need to realize that it is going to be the mess that we take with us, not some perfect little picket fence and house. So.
Well, when it comes to human evolution policies, and I mean, we could be talking about hours. In fact, that's why there are conferences that last for days, and we still, try to figure out how to move forward. But I want to be mindful of your time. Michelle, if you had, Michelle's words of wisdom for anyone who's listening, either to apply it to their law career or to space, what would be Michelle's words of wisdom?
Be happy. I think that um, I have a lot of I teach a lot of students, and we have a lot of conversations about work-life balance. And if you're happy with what you do, that concept, work-life balance, flies out the window. There is no balance because your work is your life because that is what you love. And so when you think about the term, the other thing I would say, be happy and define yourself. Define success for yourself. Don't let other people define success for you. I took a number of years off to raise my boys, and I will never regret it. And people say, oh, what a sacrifice to stay home. Oh my God, it wasn't a sacrifice to stay home. It was the most selfish thing I've ever done in my whole life because I didn't want to leave them. And that is just how I felt. And that is what I wanted to do. And I was told countless times, if you quit now, you're never going to get back in. You're never going to be a partner. Big law will never have you back because you stayed home with your children. So what? Do what's happy for you, and certainly you have to think about yourself 10 years or 20 years from now, but don't let what you're worried about 20 years from now determine your decisions for today. Especially if you're in your 20s and early 30s, just get out there and do what you want. Don't fall into a job because you think, oh, I need to be a CEO or the head of some brand or a partner in a law firm. Go embrace what you love, and you'll find a way to make money to survive. Or if making money is what you love, go make a lot of money. But love it while you're doing it. Life is too short for you to keep worrying about what people think or how it's going to impact your future 30 years from now. And that the people who are most successful, the people who have the best, not the biggest, the best impact on the world are the people who are really passionate about what they do, because what they share is their passion, and that is so much better than any other kind of lesson that you can try and give.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. I often tell people it's choose what are your priorities and then what resonates with you, and then go for it. If it's career, it's career. If it's family, it's family. If it's art, it's art. But understand that whatever you choose, there's going to be some ups and downs, and you have to choose a path that independently of those downs, you still feel that you belong there and you're committed to those. And this is where you're going to grow. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. Michelle, I saw on your website that for All Moonkind, your personal email is on the website. So you make yourself quite accessible. People want to reach out to you. You're on LinkedIn. You're quite active on Twitter. We'll put all those links in the descriptions. Is there anything that you want to share before we end this conversation?
Yeah, I want to say thank you for that. I want to say that it is incumbent upon all of us to share our love for space with the rest of the wider world. I would encourage everybody who's listening, who picks this up, who skims through this. You can listen to it on 4 times speed, whatever. Just go out and talk to somebody about the moon. Go out and talk to somebody about how important remote sensing is. Go out and talk to somebody and tell them how nothing on Earth survives without our ability to harness resources in space. What we really need to do is we need to get a surge of public emotion and public support for space activities, recognizing that they are not to abandon Earth, but to better Earth and better life for all humans, whether they live on Earth or in space. And so, yeah, we are shouldering, those of us who are passionate about space and involved in the space industry are shouldering a burden to make sure the rest of the world catches on.
I think it's because ultimately we're passionate about the human experience and the human story. And I think that many recognize that this is just the next evolution of the human story, not just space. Michelle, it was a wonderful conversation. We were due for this one for quite some time, and I'm looking forward for the next one. And we'll put all the links so that people can connect with you. I know that you've been on the road and busy for 2022. 2023 is going to be the same thing. So I look forward for a path to cross again.
Absolutely. We talked a little bit about law, but yeah. Thank you so much. And I encourage people to reach out to me. Sometimes if I'm traveling, it takes a little while for me to respond, but I will always respond.
Well, the future of space, the goal is really to find that commonality that we have independently of what we do, or, whether it's an engineer or a law professor. There's the human story. And, that's why I always ask my guests, what is the human story of going to space? And then we end up talking about what it is to be human. And that's exactly what we did today. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate it.